As we said before, this learning series is organized by Mandera Climate Resilience Institute. This is a Ugandan-based institute that offers services in climate action and disaster risk management. So for this first session of our carbon market learning series, we shall have a look at basically 5 areas. Being our first day, we intend to remind ourselves basics of carbon market, climate action, and carbon trade. I'm guessing that each one of us could have met any of these words: carbon market, carbon trade, or climate change. So in most times, carbon markets and carbon trading are interchangeably used, though at different occasions, they can have different meanings. So for this session, we shall be using these terms differently. I mean, using carbon markets and carbon trading differently. So for this session, we are going to have a look at the historical background and evolution of carbon trading. Then we shall have a look at carbon markets and how it relates with climate change. Then we shall have an overview of carbon market mechanisms, that is the compliance markets and voluntary carbon markets. Then we shall also have a glimpse at challenges and criticisms of carbon markets. And then we shall also have a brief overview on what the future holds for carbon markets. Historically, carbon trading or carbon markets started around 1990. The carbon market as a market-based approach to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. GHG means greenhouse gases. So this was an approach that was adopted by United States around 1990s, introduced as a cap and trade program, basically in the act that they called the Clean Air Act Amendment of 1990. And this approach was basically to control the emissions of sulfur dioxide emissions and also to combat acid rain. My assumption is that most of us, if not all of us, have a background in biology or simple chemistry, but not complicated chemistry. So I'm guessing that if I talk of acid rain or if I talk of sulfur dioxide, I'm not making any one of us lost. Then in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol introduced carbon trading mechanisms. These include clean development mechanism and emissions trading systems. Clean development mechanism, basically, it was about developed countries contributing money to support development undertakings in developing countries aimed at reducing carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. So it was about developing countries raising money and supporting developing countries to undertake projects that emit less or do not emit greenhouse gases. These included establishment of, let's say, water dams, waste management infrastructures. When a clean development project had to benefit from the fund, it had to prove that it would not have existed if the Green Development Fund is not provided. At a later time, we shall see the stringent measures that shape the carbon market, and not only with compliance, but even for voluntary carbon markets. Then another mechanism that was introduced by the Kyoto Protocol is emissions trading systems. These systems basically were used, or even now are used, in developed countries where companies are issued emission licenses. The cap and trade program is, let's say, you have an organization that, let's say, is involved in the production of cement. Then government allocates you, let's say, 10 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent that you have in this time period, let's say 1 year, you must emit not more than, let's say, 10 tons. So the emission trading system is used in allocating emission allowances to companies. So if a company wants to emit more, through the emission trading system, can purchase extra emission allowances from another company that has not exhausted its emission allowance. That's basically how emission trading systems work. Examples are we have European Union emission trading system, also China has one, and USA also has one. So the first emission trading system to be established was in 2005 by European Union. Then in the carbon market landscape, 2015 was an instrumental year where the Paris Agreement was entered into, where countries came together to join efforts to address the climate crisis. The Paris Agreement gives countries, it is based on a principle that each participant, each country, or each party to the agreement plays a given role depending on its capacity and in other words, each party has its responsibilities. Then another interesting part of the Paris Agreement is Article 6, that provides for internationally transferred mitigation outcomes across border or inter countries, where maybe also to better understand this is that Paris Agreement requires parties to commit themselves through what they call NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution. NDC, at a later time, we shall have a deeper look at it. But basically, a state or a party to the Paris Agreement commits to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. If you've been reducing, let's say, 100 tons per year, a country can commit that we are going to reduce from 100 to 70. Therefore, how does the Article 6 come into play into this carbon market? If a country X has committed to reduce its carbon emissions up to 70, but at the end of the set period, they have reduced up to 60, then the Article 6 allows this country to sell this extra emission reduction achievement to another country that either is likely not to meet its commitment, its target, or that has surpassed it. So this helps countries or parties to the Paris Agreement to achieve their targets in an event that the unplanned circumstances happen. Then we have the voluntary carbon markets. These, as the name suggests, they are voluntary. They are not legally binding, but they exist because they are individuals or organizations that want to offset their carbon footprint. Let's say you're a factory producing cement and you let's say emit 100 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases into air, and you choose to offset your carbon footprint. What options are available for you? Then you go for voluntary carbon market, where you buy credits, carbon credits from organizations or companies that have sequestered the carbon dioxide. At a later time, we shall discuss more. We have experts that are going to discuss the voluntary carbon markets, as you saw on our schedule. Then the latest development in the carbon markets is the integration of digital solutions. These include artificial intelligence to monitor, assess, and verify transactions in the carbon market. Transactions include emissions, sequestration, then the verification process mentioned there. We have been talking about carbon markets and carbon trading and emissions and whatnot. How do these relate with climate change? I'm assuming that we are all aware that there is climate change and that greenhouse gases have contributed much towards climate change by affecting the ozone layer. So carbon markets, they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. How? We have talked about emission trading systems, for example, in developed countries. So the carbon markets through emission trade system, by setting limits to organizations and companies that emit, the market reduces emissions. So if you can't reduce your emissions, then you would be forced to buy extra allowances, emission allowances from other companies that have not exceeded or that have not reached their allowances. So you see, the role of carbon markets is very key. The fact that they directly they directly hit at on the point that is responsible for the climate change that we are faced with. Secondly, carbon markets, they contribute or they promote clean energy investments. For example, if a country through Article 6 sells its extra achieved emission reduction to another country, the revenues raised through selling these emission reductions can be used to promote clean energy investments. This could be building dams, this could be solar energy distribution and transmission in the countries. Then carbon markets, they encourage sustainable practices by providing incentives to businesses to adopt low carbon technologies and nature-based solutions. By sustainable, we are talking about undertaking activities that benefit the current generation, but without compromising future generations. So if, for example, a company has to buy emission allowances of, let's say, $1 million to allow it to emit more, it makes business sense that rather than buying a year in, a year out extra emission allowances, then this company, rather than continuing to use fossil fuels, then it will rather invest this 1 million US dollars into installation or establishment of low carbon technologies. This could be solar or this could be hydro power. So carbon markets encourage sustainable practices that are low carbon emitting and also nature-based solutions. When we talk about the nature-based solutions, we're talking about like planting trees. Previously, we have talked about voluntary carbon markets. The common ones is planting of trees, where organizations that want to offset their carbon footprint facilitate or fund afforestation and afforestation in developing countries. So you find that carbon markets indeed are incentives to establishment of nature-based solutions to climate crisis, like forestry and waste management and wetland conservation. Then supports climate finance. The carbon markets provides financial resources for developing countries to mitigate and adapt climate change. Climate finance, basically, this is about sourcing of funds or the mechanisms or the possible ways to raise money to support climate mitigation and adaptation, or what you may call climate action. So carbon markets provide financial resources for developing countries to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Then carbon markets, they facilitate global cooperation. As we saw, Article 6 provides for cross-border cooperation, whereby, as I said, countries can cooperate in or towards achieving their Paris commitments. So you find that if, let's say, country has previously not been collaborating or cooperating with a given country, then this carbon market can be a starting point for global cooperation or for interstate or intercountry cooperation. Let me have a brief talk about carbon market mechanisms. Let me start with compliance carbon markets. These are basically regulated. They are government mandated. As we previously talked, the Paris Agreement, each party to the Paris Agreement is required to commit towards the global goal of mitigating climate change and through reduced emissions. So compliance market is where a country has committed itself that it's going to reduce. So it has regulations attached to it. There are policies attached to it. As you can see it, NDC, National Determined Contribution, that is in line with the Paris Agreement. Then the cap and trade systems. As we said, these are about emission trade systems as we witnessed or as they exist in European Union, then China, then the carbon taxation, where for a company to emit a given volume, then they pay tax for that emission they have made. Those are some of the compliance carbon market mechanisms. Then the voluntary carbon markets mechanisms, these are non-mandatory. As I previously tried to explain, a company X wants to offset its carbon footprint, then it looks for an organization or a company or individuals that have projects that are sequestered or that are sequestrating carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases. Then after verifications using standards like Vera and Gold Standard and others, then they buy those credits as a sign or to offset their carbon footprint. As you can see, we have come up with that table that illustrates the differences between compliance and voluntary carbon markets. As you can see that for compliance, the government is regulating, so there are policies, but for voluntary, they are not regulated. It is basically voluntary participation. Then for compliance, it is countries, companies, industries that are into compliance market. But at the same time, companies can also participate in voluntary carbon markets, then the NGOs and individuals. The purpose of compliance is to meet legal emission reduction targets, as we saw that countries through NDCs, they set their targets in line with the Paris Agreement. Then for voluntary markets, this is voluntarily to offset carbon footprints or emission reductions. You will notice that when talking about emissions, many times we talk about carbon dioxide. For these calculations, they are basically made in carbon dioxide equivalents. Greenhouse gases are measured in terms of carbon dioxide equivalents. So by mentioning carbon dioxide, most times it interchangeably means greenhouse gases. And for this discussion, we'll be using them interchangeably. Then compliance markets, they have standards. They have mandatory compliance standards. Then for voluntary, there are various voluntary standards. As we saw, we have VELA, we have Gold Standard, we have Plan Vivo, etc. Verification, compliance markets are very strict. Third parties are involved to do verifications. And as we move along, we will see that the verification process of compliance markets is one setback that the developed countries are faced with. And as we go along, we also note that the implementation of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement comes along with stricter verification process. We shall delve into all that as time goes on. Then voluntary markets, they are quite flexible and they are self-regulated using the standards. Then the pricing typically for compliance markets are higher and consistent. Then for voluntary carbon markets, the prices are variable and are less predictable since there is no policies or legal provisions that hold players accountable. Examples of compliance markets, we have European Union emissions trading scheme, we have California cap and trade. We also saw that there is China emission trade system. The US also has one. Then for voluntary markets, we have verified carbon standard, that is the VELA. Then we also have the gold standard. In the next sessions, we shall host someone from VELA and then also someone from Plan Vivo and Gold Standard to take us through what do they consider in verifications, what projects qualify, or what do they consider to credit or for a project to earn credits. Then what are the possible sources of carbon credits? On the left side of your screen, I've tried to come up with possible sources. We have sources can be renewable energy, we can have forestry and land use. And the forestry and land use is where we have afforestation, we have reforestation, where we have REDD+, where we have avoided forest conversion, where we have improved forest management, then soil carbon, urban forestry, name them. Then we also have household and community carbon sources. These may include energy efficiency, let's say adoption of energy efficient bulbs. Then we can also have rural solar, rural solar. That means that people are shifting from use of fossil fuels, let's say kerosene, to using solar that is renewable and not emitting. Then talking about cook stoves, we know how cook stoves, our traditional cook stoves, 3 stones, uh, use lots of fuel, in particular fuel wood, and so adoption of cook stoves, how it would result into reduced fuel use, and so there would be avoided deforestation, or the trees would not be harvested at the same rate as they would be if there are no improved cook stoves. Then the clean cook stoves distribution. Then we also have chemical industrial carbon sources, where we are talking about the carbon capture and storage. This is a new technology that is developed in Africa, I think, is only being implemented in Morocco, then in Canada and the US, where mostly carbon capture and storage is used in oil extraction, where the flaring carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are captured and either stored in uh, exhausted oil wells or reserves, or carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases like methane are captured and used, let's say, as methane uh, for transportation or for other industrial purposes. Then the refrigerant hydrofluorocarbons, if you may be aware of the Kyoto Protocol Amendment, the Kigali Kyoto Protocol Amendment, that required countries to reduce on hydrofluorocarbons used in refrigeration, was adopted. So countries, including Nigeria, including US, including Philippines, they ratified the Kigali Kyoto Protocol amendment to reduce on the production of refrigerators that use hydrofluorocarbons. So that is one source of carbon credit. Then we have waste disposal, energy efficiency, agriculture. I'm not going to go into all these, but I will be sharing notes for your reference. Then one key indicators of what a carbon credit is, or a carbon project is, it's around additionality, leakage, permanency, and co-benefits. Additionality is to prove that if the carbon project, or if there was no payment, or if there was no purchase of the carbon credit, then this project would not have existed. For example, if you go to undertake a reforestation project, for your project to qualify or to earn carbon credits, you need to prove that if your project did not exist, then this reforestation would not have taken place. If it is a waste management project that you are building a project to reduce, let's say, methane emissions, you will need to prove that if there was no credit, then this project would not have happened, or if it happened, it would have come at a higher cost, or there would be less returns on investment in that emission reduction project. That's about additionality. It adds, the project adds on what would have happened if this project never existed. Then the leakage, it's about if you undertake, let's say, afforestation, or let's say RED+, you are, let's say, going to Kalangara district in Uganda and you are saying, we are not going to allow deforestation. If that stopping of deforestation in one district leads to deforestation in another district, that would qualify as a leakage. So for a carbon project to earn carbon credit or carbon credits, it must prove that it is insulated against leakages. Then the permanence is, you are talking about, let's say, carbon capture. You are going to capture carbon while extracting oil and returning it to the well reservoirs. For how long would it be there without flaring or without being emitted? Then the co-benefits, as you could be aware, when we talk about, let's say, reforestation comes with many other benefits, including environmental services. This could be water purification, air purification, biodiversity enhancement, job creation, etc. So for a project to qualify for carbon credit, to earn carbon credits, then it must have these qualities. At a later time, we have an expert who is going to explain the process of developing a carbon project from design up to selling the carbon credits. Some of the challenges that are faced by carbon markets is the carbon leakages. It's quite hard to control the carbon leakages. It's quite hard. So that is one challenge that carbon project developers must critically think about. And in my view, the buyers will need to be, can I say, more lenient, but not to mean that they should forego the integrity of what the carbon credit should be. But there is a need, as we move forward in future, there is a need to harmonize on how to overcome this challenge of carbon leakage. Then low carbon prices, as we saw under voluntary carbon markets, prices are unstable. And because the buyers are not legally binding, there are no regulations for that. So that is one challenge that project developers and also, let's say, communities are faced with. You've planted trees on your land and you're getting prices that cannot offset the foregone opportunities. And this has resulted into some players cutting down trees, which they previously had committed to come into carbon market. And this is the question of permanency that I talked about previously. Then another interesting point about low carbon prices. This is basically faced by developing countries, if I may speak from the African continent perspective. You find that 1 ton of carbon equivalent on European Union emission transaction system goes, let's say, for $20. But you find that in let's say Uganda or Sudan or DRC, 1 ton of carbon equivalent goes for $8. Basically, previously, prices used to be fair, but along the journey, I think around 2008, no, 2016, 17, 18, some activists, organizations from Africa, they had an argument of what they called carbon dumping, where they argued that entrepreneurs in Europe and developed countries, they freely emit, they freely emit, then come in Africa and buy credits, meaning they are continuing to produce, they are continuing to emit and come here and buy. So they called it some sort of neocolonialism. And because of the transparency and the requirement of integrity of carbon credits, the European Union and developed countries had to stop the trading in carbons between Africa and these developed countries. And so this literally means that the players in developed countries remained at the mercy of voluntary carbon individual companies and individuals who want to buy. This is the question that needs to be addressed, as if Africa or if Uganda or Malawi or Nigeria is to participate and benefit from the carbon market. Then the carbon volatility is that the market is ever changing. Someone who bought today may not be willing to buy tomorrow. And this basically is under the voluntary carbon market. Then double counting, where a forest farmer sells credits to this emitter, then resells to this one. That results into double counting. So at the end of the day, you find that the international community will assume to have reduced the global carbon emissions, but when actually less has been achieved. Then social and environmental concerns. This is basically, I can give an example under RED Plus, where RED Plus is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradations. So the social and environmental concerns under this program, if I may use them as an example, is to say, if you are saying we should not cut down trees, then the forest-dependent communities should not be heavily impacted. For example, we have in Uganda people called Batwa, the Batwa community that live in the forest. If you are saying there should be no more use of this forest, how are you accounting for the Batwa community that lives or that have their livelihood dependent on the forests? So accounting for the social and environmental concerns under the carbon markets is one of the challenges faced by carbon project developers. Then limited access for developing countries. As I said, the limitation to access on European Union emission trading systems, then the China emission trading system. As in, let's say, for example, Uganda cannot trade its carbon credits on European Union emission trading system. However, if this was possible, it would mean if I planted my forest in some eastern part of Uganda and I have been verified and I have carbon credits, then I should be able to integrate them on European emission trading systems so that companies can buy. But at the moment, that is not possible. So what does the future hold for carbon markets? We are seeing increased global integration, as can be witnessed from Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, that allows cross-border, the ITMOs, internationally transmittable mitigation outcomes, or countries being able to sell their additional emission reductions to other countries. So this global integration, we hope that will at some point result into integration of developing countries with emission trading systems of developed countries to allow higher prices. Then we are seeing raising demand for voluntary markets. Many companies are coming out to offset their carbon footprints, which is a great achievement, or it is very promising, where we hope that by this, then the price of the carbon credits will stabilize or will be a little bit more higher than how it is. Then we are seeing stronger regulation and transparency. You can use an example of the Article 6 that introduces a third party, the UNFCCC subsidiary body that is responsible for verifications for countries to be able to trade in their ITMOS. So these stronger regulations and transparency are going to help overcome the double counting, then also the additionality and to avoid leakages. Then higher carbon prices, these on both voluntary and compliance markets. Then innovation in monitoring and verifications. I've previously talked about the integration of GIS, where you can be in the US. If you've bought credits, then you can be able to see actually the forest from where the credits were generated that you have bought. Then the use of artificial intelligence to address the questions of leakages, additionality, and the compliance with carbon market regulations. Then access for developing countries, as I talked about, the use of Article 6 in trading in ITMOS and other extra or additional emission reduction achievements under NDC. What is the way forward on the carbon market? We are talking about strengthening governance and oversight mechanisms. As the Commission of Climate Change Department of the Government of Uganda at the Ministry of Water and Environment put it, that they are working towards strengthening governance, building institutional capacity, putting in place regulatory frameworks, building capacity of the players. Indeed, they are in line with our point number one, and we hope that if these governance and oversight mechanisms are strengthened, then carbon market or carbon trade is going to be an opportunity that will be realized. Then foster cooperation and harmonization of policies. I do not want to preempt the Uganda's regulations of the carbon market regulations and the guidelines, but the process involved harmonization of different policies that speak to climate change. For example, when you talk about climate smart agriculture and you are talking about, let's say, irrigation, are there policies that, let's say, subsidize the importation of irrigation equipment? If it is not there, then is there a need for that? If you are saying that there should be REDD+ or reduced deforestation, what says of the land ownership policies? If a forest is on the private land and you are saying people should not cut down trees or forests, how are you going to achieve that? So the harmonization of policies and regulations in a country or in player states is key. So for each country to move forward, there is a need to ensure that policies are harmonized and then intergovernmental agency cooperation. In Uganda, we're talking about climate smart agriculture, climate that would fall under Ministry of Agriculture, but now we are having climate change department under Ministry of Water and Environment responsible for that. So how can these two entities be brought together to ensure that the target goal is achieved? For you from different countries, if you are working on policies or regulations with carbon market, this is one key area you need to look at: interagency cooperation, then harmonization of policies, so that the country, you align your regulatory and institutional frameworks to achieve greenhouse gas emissions or to better participate in the carbon markets. Then provide training for stakeholders. I put an arrow there to show that this training speaks to that point. In 20, I think it is last year, I co-represented Uganda in Addis Ababa during the first Africa Continental Carbon Market Stakeholders Engagement Conference. And one of the areas that was identified was lack of capacity, lack of technical capacity on the African continent, in that most people do not understand what carbon market is, what it comes with, and what the possible implications are. So it's key that if Africa as a continent is to better participate in the carbon market, then it's prerequisite that we understand how it operates, in that we align our expectations and our actions so that we better benefit or we better contribute towards global climate change mitigation goals. Then facilitate knowledge exchange through regional networks. Here we are, and as I put it at start, this learning series is more of learning from each other, share experience. How is it done in Uganda? How is it done in Kenya? How is it done in Malawi? How about in Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Sudan, Ethiopia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Kenya? How is it done? So these networks will support us understand, will allow us understand and to adopt better practices that are happening across borders. And this learning series directly speaks to that. Then creating enabling policies environment, that is to implement supportive policies and regulations, then encouraging private sector investment through incentives. As you must have noticed on our schedule, we have that aspect where we're going to discuss how corporations and private sectors can integrate carbon markets in their sustainability plans. It is clear that in Africa continent, most of our private players have not, can I say, picked interest or participated in carbon markets. This could be due to lack of information, or it could be due to lack of incentives or technical knowledge. And through this learning series, we will identify those gaps, and as a cohort, we see how we can contribute towards filling that gap. Then another way forward is to promote inclusivity and equity, ensure benefits reach project communities and marginalized groups. You have said that you're implementing RED Plus in, let's say, in a forest that is inhabited, let's say, by indigenous people. You have deprived them of some aspects of their livelihoods. So if you sell the carbon credits, then you make sure that the funds you get, they reach these people on ground, the indigenous people, the forest dependent people who forego some livelihood opportunities. If we cannot have that achieved, then the integrity of the credits get compromised. These are some of the factors that are considered when credit units are to be awarded or verified, is to ensure that communities that are planting trees, communities that are participating in waste management, indeed they benefit from the project proceedings. Then foster participation from all sectors of society, as the academia, the NGO, that is civil society, the government, the private sector, the region, faith houses, we all need to participate. Then leverage international support. I am guessing that we could be aware of, let's say, loss and damage, or Article 6, or these commitments from developed countries as stipulated under the Paris Agreement. Countries need to see how to engage in these markets or these opportunities to benefit their communities. Then to seek technical and financial support from global partners. For example, United Nations Red Plus program or United Nations Environment Program or the GCF, they have done a lot of work, the FAO, the UNDP, to support countries with technical support to develop carbon projects, to ensure compliance, to formulate policies, to streamline institutional arrangements for carbon market alignment. So if you're in this session and you are looking at supporting your country, participate better in carbon market, then it's key that you consider global partners that are facilitating technical and financial support of states or countries that intend to participate in carbon markets. Dear colleagues, it has been almost, wow, an hour of running through the presentation. At this time, I would like to hear from you if you have any particular question about what I have talked about from start up to now. The space is yours. For better flow, I suggest that you raise the arm, then I call your name, then you have the floor to put your question forward. Am I missing someone's hand? Are we there, colleagues? Any questions?
Yes, we are there.
Yes, please, Henry, take the floor.
Thank you, presenter. So I was looking for the icon to put a hand, but it is not visible where on my laptop. I don't know why. However, it was a nice presentation, and a lot of learning is entailed in. I don't have much to ask, but there is a terminology used. I don't know whether it is a short form, which I'd like to understand clear. It is ITMOS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. I see there are questions in the chat. Patricia, you have a question? I see you are unmuted.
No, sorry.
It's okay. Then I see Waman Junior. You have your hand up. Please take the floor.
Yes, thanks so much for the presentation. My question is between the carbon pricing mechanisms and the emission trade systems, which one aligns more with Uganda's national climate change policy?
Junior, would you repeat your question, please?
Between the carbon pricing mechanisms and the emission trade systems, because I see that most of them are now being implemented in the country currently. So between the pricing mechanisms For example, the cap and trade and the emission system and the cap emission price, yes, which in Uganda is in form of the fuel price, that price they put on fuel. Which one aligns well with our climate change policy?
Thank you, Junior, for that question. If Henry, I have noted your question. Let me first attempt to respond. David, I see your hand. Let me first attempt to respond to Junior and Henry. Junior, if I may answer you at the moment, in the entire African continent, we have no emission trading system that is operational. And I'm not sure whether the cap and trade, as you tried to mention, on fuel, I don't know whether the taxes imposed on fuel in Uganda is a mechanism to reduce GHG emissions. I'm not sure. As far as I know, there is no carbon taxation in Uganda. Junior, you want to put something clear? Please take the floor.
Yes, you know that Uganda, we don't have any emission tax, specific emission tax. So I think the tax they impose on fuel, it does as the emission tax. I stand to be corrected.
Junior, your network was breaking. Could you repeat that?
I say, as now as a country, we don't have an emission tax. Yes, but what we have is that tax they impose on fuel that comes in the country. So does it serve as our emission tax? I was just inquiring from you.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Junior. I would say that the taxes imposed on fossil fuels in Uganda is not a taxation on GHG emissions. Then Henry asked about ITMOS, internationally transferable mitigation outcomes. As I tried to explain that under Article 6, where I said that if a country you have said that you want to, let's say, reduce your emissions by 70%, then you reduce your emissions by 80%, that extra 10% emission reduction that can be transferred to any other player in the market. There are a number of ITMOS, can I say, kinds, if you may consider COSEA, that is used by, that operates under the aviation sector. I don't know whether that answers Henry's question. If it does not, please feel free to come back and stress the question.
Yes, it answers. I only wanted to get it see full. I mean, in full. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. David, you had your hand up. Mwesi David.
Thank you so much, Nelson, for that presentation. I've surely learned a lot. I just have a few questions. One is that you talked about the fact that there's some level of regulation of carbon markets, in a sense that there is always strict compliance rules that have to be followed. And for the for the on the side of VCMs, apart from these organizations which develop the standards, is there another maybe another?
David, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, David. Repeat that. You were wondering whether there are institutions that do what?
Regulate those players who develop voluntary standards.
Oh,
Let's say maybe, is there another mechanism to regulate Vera and gold standard? And then the other question is what steps maybe countries like Uganda or maybe countries in Africa taking towards transparency of these carbon markets? Because when you try to look for information about maybe regulation, about what is being done, it's always scanty, especially in Africa. So I'm just wondering what steps are being taken to ensure transparency and democratization of information in this regard.
thank you, David, for incredible questions. Control over standards institutions. Standards, they operate independently. There is no a body that controls, for example, Vela or Gold Standard or Plan Vivo. There is no higher authority over them. When a standard, for example, Vera develops a methodology, they publish it and they call for public input. So if buyers feel convinced that it is a Plan Vivo standard or methodology that is better than the other, then a buyer will choose that. If a buyer feels that Vela methodology is better, then the buyer would choose that. In principle, if I may give an example of, there is Art-Tree's architecture for REDD+ transactions. It is a standard for REDD+, but its strength is on its component of safeguards. Different standards have different strengths, so it depends on the buyer. So the buyer is higher authority that questions or that approves on whether to use a standard or which standard is better than the other. About the transparency in carbon markets in Africa, as you said, the information on carbon market, not only in Africa, but world over, is scanty. Many people are still trying to learn what carbon markets are, what they mean, and how to better understand them. So the transparency in voluntary carbon market is how a buyer sees transparency is by believing in a standard. For example, if I know that Vela, before it verifies a credit or before it awards a credit, then it will go through a stringent procedure. Then I would be okay with buying a carbon credit verified by Vela. You will hardly find open information on transparency documented, but the documentation is basically through these standards. The only transparency that there is now was under Clean Development Mechanism, and now the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that is being worked on, where this third party verifies and publishes projects that would benefit from, let's say, GCF funds or UNEP funds. So it is more of proving to the standard your project is adopting. It's about how you discuss and certify their questions. And if this answer does not fully answer your question, in the subsequent sessions, we have experts from Vela and Gold Standard and Plan Vivo. Feel free to raise that question again, in that we learn from them, or if they have information they can share for public use, then they put it forward for our learning. And that's the reason why this series existed, so that we learn from each other. David, I see your hand up. Please have the floor.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answers. Yes, the other question I wanted to ask is about you said governments can, through Article 6, be able to sell additional credits if they have achieved their NDCs. So these credits which they sell, are they from their own projects, maybe from the government's project, or they can even sell credits from private sector?
Thank you, David. David, your question is quite tempting, in that it is about to make me unpack the Article 6 mechanism. But, you know, under Article, there is a component of authorization. This authorization component is to avoid double counting. And if you are avoiding double counting, it means you will not sell what has already been sold. And the authorization is, if I may put, each country is required to have a register. So, and for a private entity to trade or to sell its credits, then it sells in accordance with what has been allocated to them in the register. I don't want to go into nesting and all that, but if a country has stated, let's say, from its policy realignment, David, you are making me preempt the Article 6. If you don't mind, could we discuss that when we reach at that point? But what I can say for now is a country cannot sell credit that is not its credits, or it cannot sell credits that are privately owned. Each country is supposed to have a mechanism to ensure that there is no double counting, and each project is allocated through nesting its credits, the much it can achieve. It's a mechanism that the country has to adopt. So we shall unpack that when we get to Article 6 implementation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, David. I think we are almost done with our time, aren't we? I'm thinking that we have all registered. If you have not